Alpine Liquid Fertilizers is your full-season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Visit alpinepfl.com for more.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, distributed under the Real Ag Media Network and powered by the Hebert Group of Companies. We're going to keep this one a little lax. We don't have a guest today, so I feel like I've seen you every day this week, so I'm not sure what we have left to talk about, but let's start with crop production. I mean, obviously the farm shows probably have a little less warrant as your career gets long, but like for me, they've changed a lot, so I kind of want to know, when you come to a crop show, what are you looking for nowadays?
Well, I mean, I guess the big issue is I came to a crop show for 2 days and I walked through the crop show to go have a beer with a friend. That was all I did at the crop show. I think that for me personally, what a crop show does is it brings everybody into one spot and saves me 3 weeks of travel, whether that be, farm network people, whether that be CEOs of companies, or whether that be people in the political world. It still gets a lot of people in the same city for a bunch of reasons. So I can use it to reduce travel. But I mean, I think an interesting thing too is we did that recent survey, right, of the farmer coach group, and we're going to do a bigger one of agriculture in general with a partner. And I think, what did it have? 40 some responses, and agronomy was ranked number 5 in that what farmers want more of. And then the shows are still pretty heavy on, agronomy and machinery type stuff. And our network saying they want more stuff around entrepreneurship, around CFO type work, on being the CEO, understanding marketing and logistics better, those types of things.
Yeah, like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I remember walking around with Dad as a kid. So, I mean, I still see the benefit of bringing the kids in, letting them see the machinery, getting them excited about ag. But for me, I walked it for 20 minutes and I was like, same show, different year. And then I went and did the meetings I had to do, and that was it. So, I mean, they've definitely taken on a different meeting, and maybe it's a bit because 2025, I don't think equipment quite looks as sexy in the balance sheet, but yeah, I think that's definitely changed.
There's one coming up in Brandon here, Manitoba Ag Days, and they still have quite a bit of I don't want to call it, like, they have some of the big equipment, but they have all that operational efficiency type equipment. So I take, like, some of my key guys, all go to it, and that's where we originally found, the tire changer for the skid steer to have for on the sprayers, and different things for helping change oil faster and stuff like that. I think some of the shows for some of your crew can still be super. That's still where you get some of the ideas. I think at our level, a lot of the ideas we're getting on strategy and stuff are coming from more confidential type meetings than they are at the show, right? But you still run into some pretty good people.
Well, and I mean, I went to four different meetings, and none of them were at Prairie Land. So, I mean, the only reason I went to Prairie Land is to sit on a panel for an hour. So, no, it's a bit of a different experience, I find. So it's been a while since we sat and chatted, but I mean, I know my spring, the last couple of weeks, has been a whirlwind. So I kind of wanted to touch a little bit on. I went down to Texas for a week, down to A&M, and did TEPAP. And I wrote the blog last year about my experience, and it was a great experience. Good again this year. A little bit of a different feel, probably, being in San Antonio rather than Austin. But I know you have fond memories, and I know you're still part of the board there. So give me your overall on TEPAP, and then I made my top 10 list of the things I wrote down because I took notes this year, and I want your opinion on some of them, and I'll give you my opinion, and then we'll just kind of go through and give the audience a bit of here's what TEPAP brought to my mind and what I found was really interesting this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of the overarching features, I think one of the issues in agriculture is we don't think big enough, and we don't look outside our circle enough for solutions to some of the stuff we're having problems with. And I think that's, I got lucky, my run at TEPAP, I got to know Danny really well, and it really turned into a mentor. I mean, he was on the advisory board for our companies, and I would argue if he isn't the best mind in agriculture of all time, he's in the top 3 for sure. So that maybe jaded me a little bit, but the big thing I still have crews that I went through TEPAP with that we touch base 2-3 times a year, just on big ideas and where we think agriculture is going and how we're tweaking our operations, how we deal with, team and building team and strategy. So some of the lifelong relationships, but the really big one is just being around a group of presenters and farmers that are willing to look outside the box and think big, right? And then it's your job to bring back that kind of 1,000,000-foot level view and ideas and realize which ones you should implement. And then the last piece is, I mean, it's Whitman in particular, but some of the other presenters too. I mean, these are all good operations. They got no problem calling you out on it, right? I still think there's a little bit too much. And we were one of them. I went in 2008, and I think we scored like 65 or 68% on Dick's test, and I think now we'd score 98 or 100, right?
We're getting to that. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it's not where you score. It's what are you willing to do about it. And I think it's one spot where you can be held accountable.
No, and I found that same thing. I mean, this year, the first year was kind of like a oh wow kind of moment of, first of all, you're pretty much drinking out of a fire hose for 7 straight days, and if you get into the alcohol like a few of the younger ones do, it becomes a very long week. I'm obviously too old to do that now, but I found that the first year was like a kind of just getting your feet under you kind of thing, and this year I was more prepared, and the networks I think is probably the biggest one for me this year. Meeting the people again from a year ago, we kept in touch throughout the year, kind of texts here and there, but it's that week with a whole bunch of different production systems in different areas, different geographies. It does open your mind to what is out there and what could be, which is you go in thinking we're doing really well, and then you come out thinking, oh, I could be better in a lot of areas. So
yeah, I mean, there's always places to improve, and in most cases, you'll find those improvements from somebody that's not doing exactly what you are. So, not saying we can't learn from other wheat, canola, barley, small grains farms, but we're probably going to learn more from a corn bean guy or a hog guy or a value add guy, just because there's a little change in their business that's created the success, and it can be implemented through other businesses, right?
Yeah, the interesting part in going back to your discussion on Whitman's checklist, and I mean, I've talked about it enough in Farmer Coach, and I brought it up enough. They essentially give it to you on day one to bring you down a few levels. In my eyes, that's how it felt, because it's a checklist that 90% of farms, unless they really have been on top of this stuff, you're going to fail it, and it's a well-known fact that pretty much everybody fails it. So the big fact that I found this year, and talking to Dick a little more, we are 20 years into this, give or take, and the stats this year were actually worse than the stats 20 years ago. So it's essentially saying that the industry of agriculture, when it comes to business practices, has either stayed stagnant or actually gone backwards. Is that even possible?
Well, I mean, I want to say it surprises me, but I mean, there's an age-old concept that when times are good, people get lazy, right? And I mean, maybe not 20 years, but up until about 2 years ago, you could argue we were probably in one of the best decades of agriculture history. And businesses that are long cash and long equity don't tend to focus on the little things, right? But hard times are a catalyst for change. And that's what I find. And so when you're uber profitable, even if you're not doing all those little things, you tend to just think you're uber profitable and you don't look at the little things. But the problem is use good times to prepare for bad times, right? Like we always say, we get asked lots of times, what do we think we do different? And kind of the best line that I've come up with is, I think a lot of operations are worried about what could go wrong, right? And I think what I've always thought, and the whole crew is this way now, is I get worried about what could go right, and I plan for what's going to go wrong. So then that's what we use good times for, right? Make investments for what we hope goes right, and we make plans for what will go wrong. And eventually crop prices will drop. There'll be the bell curve on equipment and cost of production compared to revenue won't be right. That at some point, one of the 4 Ds is going to happen, right? Death, dismemberment, divorce, departure. And so do you have your paperwork set up for that? At some point, someone's going to come ask you to expand and probably buy way too many quarters over what you want. Do you have a plan? And so I think that's the big thing, is just, be excited or be worried about what might go right and plan for what will go wrong instead of just worrying or being terrified of what could go wrong.
Well, the interesting part I'm finding is, I mean, you and I always have the discussion on the StatsCan numbers in Canada and how they they show a bad picture of agriculture because they're not really. I mean, 189,000 farms, but 16 make over $1 million. You know, that kind of thought process. But this group that's down at TEPAP, this is essentially a little more progressive group that is paying a lot of money to learn more. So these stats are what worries me, because this is what I'm referring to as the top 40% or 30% or whatever it might be.
Probably 20.
Yeah. So this is what scares me, because I'm going to throw out some numbers here. And if you're listening right now, I'd write them down, because this scares the shit out of me. 25% set goals or formalize any performance reviews, roles, anything like that. 15% have a strategic plan. Less than 25% track key ratios. That includes bank ratios. I mean, as an accountant, that makes me almost sick to my stomach. And then less than 40% market with no idea of cost of production. How is that possible in an industry that has accumulated this much wealth? And I realize, like you said, the last 10 years, but how are we still operating?
Well, I mean, it's no different than our time being accountants, though, right? We had lots of clients come in and didn't know what they made until we did up their notice to read or year end, right? So that means they had been doing the exact same thing. It's just, you know, I think the biggest thing that we still don't completely have nailed down is that the amount of hours working in your business versus you're on your business. And there's kind of two reasons that happens. One, you either don't like people and don't want to delegate, right? Or two, even when you do have the right people and you delegate, you feel too guilty, so you keep going outside. Yeah. And yet, you know, your team can probably handle hauling all the grain this week, but they can't handle the conversation with the bank when times are tough or times are good and you want to expand. And so are you taking enough time to be prepared for those things? And the other piece is, I mean, I go back to when, actually, I'll start this. A friend of mine's grandma just passed away, and she had a great line. She's 105. And the way she explained her life is, I started my life in horses and buggies, and I finished my life in a driverless taxi. Right? Now, if we go to the world of agriculture, I remember I started renting land in about grade 9. And I remember doing cost of productions with my dad, because I had to take out with my mom and dad, and because I had to take out my loan, right? And we were hoping for $200 an acre of gross revenue. Our cost of production was $150, right? And now labor, power, machinery is $150, right? Nitrogen,
if you're lucky.
Yeah, like, so I think the one thing that's happened is, you know, the percents are all the same, gross revenue to cost of production to income, but the numbers have just got so big that it's made it that much more important to know them and have a plan, because you know, $10 or $20 an acre loss in the old days in today's world is 50 or 70. And you multiply that by your acres. Like, are you comfortable losing $1 million of your equity or not? And if you're not, then you better have a plan.
Yeah. So that's actually a good segue into the second one I took some notes on, because if we're talking the amount of risk on farms, obviously you tie that back to the stress levels. And I mean, there was one on mental health, that it was more on succession transition, but they talked a lot about the mental health side. And I didn't realize, but I mean, suicide rates in agriculture are the 4th highest out of any industry. And mental health issues, 1 in 5. Serious mental health issues, 1 in 20. Is this, I mean, and then last one, agriculture is the 2nd most dangerous operation in the U.S. in industries. The only one worse was mining. So are we in an industry that if we don't figure out how to mitigate some of this risk or educate, is this number just going to keep getting worse? Because, I mean, we've seen it over the last decade. It is getting worse. We know that. So what's the answer? Is there an answer, I guess?
Not everybody wants to hear my answer. I said this on Advanced Grow podcast not that long ago. So, I mean, my personal opinion is growth is the answer. I think growth fixes problems. And I'm going to, you know, we're going to get kicked back and say, yeah, more people causes me more headaches. Yeah, if you don't deal with them right. But if you deal with them right, you have more people to share the load with. Like, if the same person gets the call when you have to haul grain, when something goes wrong, when a neighbor's mad, when your bank phones, when your lawyer phones, when your wife phones, when your kid, like, if every problem is going to you, it's understandable that the load gets too heavy. It does. I mean, even if you're still farming the same 2,500 acres you were 20 years ago, we just said that farm is 2 to 3 times bigger than it was in dollars dealt with, right? It was $200 gross revenue before, it's 600 to 800 now. So, but I think the big thing is not having a team around you, so it's all on your shoulders. And but I mean, I say it to make it sound like it's easy, but I mean, you've dealt with me long enough. I had a lot of guilt for a long time when a problem happened, and my team just dealt with it. They didn't phone me, right? And it took quite a while to convert to just being proud. Like I remember when Dad and I were first going through it, and I didn't tell him I bought fertilizer here on the weekend. Like that was a problem because I hadn't transferred the information. And then magically, I was like that for a little while with my crew, and now it's the point that if something minor happens, let's say it's worth less than $10,000 and there's no chance anybody could get hurt. Like put your own parameters around it. Those are kind of two of mine. And someone catches me at the rink on the weekend and says, hey, had to help your guy out there. He got stuck at the end of my lane. We had to get the tow truck and the roads were super icy. Wasn't his fault. Oh, that's good. Everything good? Yeah. You didn't know about it? No. I got 30 people here and a whole bunch of them are really good. Did they need me to come hook the tow strap up? I don't think so. Right. But, major things. We had a power line fall on an air seeder this year, 2:00 in the morning. I got the phone call and I was at the field. Right. Nobody was hurt. We got through it. The next day, everything's just like it was yesterday.
I want to pull you away from the Truth About Ag podcast to highlight one of our sponsors, Farmer Coach, the only entrepreneurial producer coaching program in Canada that offers leadership, finance, and operational training from the dirt to the boardroom. A producer program that focuses on entrepreneurial business practices and growth. An education program that links the professional services world back to the dirt and back to production agriculture. And a mass peer group of all the participants that creates a link and knowledge of both Canadian and U.S. agriculture. For more information, reach out to us at farmercoach.ca. And now back to the podcast.
But it's that sharing I don't want to call it stress because I don't want to get stressed, but sharing responsibilities can make mental health better. And I would argue it takes a period of time of being uncomfortable, but it can actually increase happiness because I mean, you've heard me say this. I mean, I'm addicted to winning more than anybody, but I would say I've almost converted to the things that make me the most joy in my business life is when my people do great. And yeah.
So let me push back a little bit. So I agree. I'm 100% on board the growth. I've been proven numerous times that growth is fixing problems. What would you tell a young farmer today, like at these land prices, at this risk? How do you find growth?
So you're saying we got a 25 to 30-year-old with 2,000 acres and no older generation around?
Sure, and not a big equity pot like some of the baby boomers are sitting on right now.
Yeah, so if I was that guy, I mean, I would say that your life can only be made better through network and relationships. So 1, find people that are the same spot as you. 2, find mentors that have been through it before and found a way to grow. And 3, use the average age of farmers being between 58 and 65 to your advantage. So the one thing you have going in that case is you are young and you are small because let's be honest, there's some people that don't want to rent to me because I'm not 25 anymore and they think I have too much. So that if I'm that 25-year-old, that's the exact guys I'm targeting. I'm going to all the neighbors. And we always say all our growth comes to us, and that 25-year-old probably can't be that way. He needs to go sit and have a coffee with the neighbors and say, hey, do you have any kids coming home? No, I sure don't want to sell it. Well, I could rent it from you. Could you teach me? Use them as a mentor. And if someone like my name gets brought up, use it against me. Kristjan's got enough already. I'm just a young guy with 2,500 acres trying to get more. Like you got to find your own little niche, and it'll be different than others. But I think there's a lot of opportunity out there of farms that are ready to retire that really don't want to sell the whole farm. They might want to sell a little bit, that are willing to do financing. But you got to have that discussion with them because if you're 2,500 and the guy that's selling is 2,500, he's probably not thinking in the back of his mind, hey, I bet you that young guy wants to double in size right now.
Yeah.
He's thinking he's got too much land for you. And so I think you got to be willing to have those conversations.
Well, and I think the moral, and I mean, we talking about the crop production show, you need to use those events not as I get to go to town, drink beer, and look at machinery. It's the networking. Go to the actual speaking events, meet people. That's the important part, and it's also the part that most people hate. So I would say get good at it.
Well, I mean, you know me better than anyone, Evan, right? Deep down, I don't even always like people that much, but it's a necessary evil of my business. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing I like better than a meeting or a supper with a group of interesting people. Like, it excites me. But to just be out with a bunch of random people doesn't give me a lot of energy. But I mean, Evan's been around me. I mean, my whole network, I have everybody classified by city. And if I'm going to be in that city and they're in my list of interesting people, I try to meet up with 2 or 3 of them every time and have a supper or have a breakfast or meet up for a beer or meet up for a coffee. And whether that be 10 minutes or 2 hours. And I'm sure if I went back through our history and said where ideas or opportunities came from, I would like to know how many just came from a random coffee or random supper when I was in Saskatoon or Toronto or Calgary, and no different than out of that same group of people, I used to send out 50 books. I think I send out close to 200 at Christmas of just people I find interesting. And it's like, hey, I read a lot of books. It's the favorite one I read last year. I think you'll appreciate it. And guess what? The first thing is they see me next time. God, that book was good. You got time for a coffee? And
I had 2 emails yesterday thanking me for the book and wanting to meet up. Right.
yeah. So I think that, and that came from TEPAP. Kleinfelter and Kip Tom hammered that into me, is that you're not going to know everything. And so there's 2 ways to fix that. 1 is read a lot, and 2 is know a lot of people. Right. And I always joke that there's a lot of people that, probably listen to the podcast that were a fan of Suits. And I mean, if you watch Suits, Harvey wasn't the smartest, right? Mike was probably the smartest. What did Harvey have? He was good at playing chess, and everybody in New York knew him, and everybody in New York owed him a favor. That's a pretty powerful thing.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Succession transition. And I obviously this thing's been beat like a dead horse, let's be fair. But I got two numbers I found really interesting. So 88% of farm owners have no retirement plan. So that's the baby boomer generation moving out. And 64% have no estate plan. And then the second fact I got, widowed persons by gender, male 19, female 81. So whether you like it or not, men are going first.
Mm-hmm.
So another reason there's got to be an estate plan. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, you were down in the U.S. and estate plans are even more critical down there because their wealth tax is like ridiculous if you don't have an estate plan. I'm not saying Canada's isn't bad, but theirs is really bad.
Hence Yellowstone.
Yeah, Yellowstone's a pretty good example of it. So, I mean, if you don't want to give your farm to the reserve like they had to get out of estate tax down in the U.S., you need a plan, right? Sure. So, but I don't care where you are. You need a plan, period, of what to do with your assets. And if that plan is give it all to charity, then do that, right? Yeah. But have a plan. Unless you want to give it all to Trudeau, which nobody wants to, yeah, then have a plan, right? 88% with no retirement plan. I'd like to say that surprises me, but it doesn't. It's just a matter of, like I said, we get so busy in our business, right? I also think, fundamentally, I also think part of it is, the real trend in succession planning in the last 20 years is that everybody's feelings have to be met.
I knew we were going here.
I won't say too much, but what I will say is if you think everybody in the company of Nutrien or the company of John Deere or the company of Myers Norris Penny is just happy every day and wants to play crib and hug, like, you're dreaming, right? So, I mean, what did we do? We argued that because we use sports analogies so much, we argued that build your business or your farm like a sports team. Don't call it a family, call it a sports team. And the reason I say that is if anyone that's played team sports, hockey, football specifically, but, baseball, basketball, but hockey and football, I think, are 2 that really show it. Like, it's almost like a cult being part of that team or even a fan on that team. And like, you love each other like a family. Like, I tell my team all the time, if one of their kids was sick, like, I'd probably pay for the Mayo Clinic for them. Like, I love them. But the thing that's different about a really good sports team versus a family is there's still business that takes place and people get hired and fired, right? If you have a bad attitude and you're bad for culture, it doesn't matter if you're one of the best players on the team, you might get traded.
And bloodline doesn't mean anything.
No. And it's not, do I want my kids to be part of this? Absolutely. Right. I watched the episode of Landman last night where Jerry Jones gives the speech about the best thing that ever happened to him wasn't the oil or Dallas Cowboys. It was that he could work with his kids. And don't get, I mean, everybody's heard me say it. I want to give my kids the opportunity to go to Harvard and build something cool enough they can come back. So don't get me, I love family, but build your business like a sports team. Now, if you're building your business like a sports team, the very first thing is don't go broke and make sure you have a lot of money, right? Like the New York Yankees have had a little extra success because they're loaded. That helps. Now there's the odd, Oakland Athletics, Billy Bean, Moneyball, and you might have to play Moneyball to try to get loaded. But let's not stick our heads in the sand and pretend that being rich doesn't help. Like the more money you make, the easier it is to have a great sports team. And I would say if I had Louis on here with me, success and growth also makes it easy, because any succession plan I've seen where it's on a 2,500, 3,000 acre farm, son or daughter comes home, dad wants to be a leader, son or daughter wants to be a leader. 2,500 acres isn't big enough for 2 leaders. So you fight. Where if they doubled in size right then, you need 2 leaders. One might be the ops manager, one might be the CEO, one might be the agronomist. I don't know. But people need roles to keep themselves fulfilled, and they need to see upside. I don't care if that's a family member or just someone on your team. And the only other option is, mom and dad want to retire within 24 months of when the succession plan starts, so that you see that there's an outcome. But too many times it's like, no, let's just do exactly what we did for the last 20 years, for the next 20 years, and it'll all be yours one day. Yeah. Sports teams don't run like that. Like I don't know any player in the NHL that would sign a $1 million contract saying, hey, I'll pay you the other $7 million 10 years from now.
Yeah.
No. Right. So I think those are a couple pretty important parts.
Well, and we both know, I mean, the term sweat equity is the worst flippant term in agriculture, because it means you did a bad succession plan. There should be no sweat equity. Everything should be paid out at fair market throughout the life of the farm.
2 of my most frustrating things, right? Sweat equity is one. And I mean, don't even pay it out in cash. Like just have it show up in retained earnings, right? Like shares of profits. And then my second biggest one is like, have a plan where mom and dad feel comfortable that the farm is their best investment. And I say this both for the farmers that are listening and for the consultants, because I've been in way too many consulting rooms where the pitch is son and daughter need to buy at least half, if not 3/4, or all the land. And then we wonder why it can't expand, because we're paying back mom and dad for another 30 years till they die. And they're sitting on a, 2 or 5 or $1 million in their account in a T-bill. Right. So I remember having the talk with them and saying, be like, Dad, like, do you want your money with some guy in New York, or do you want it here? Where, yeah, I'm calling the shots, but you'd still walk in my office and tell me I'm stupid. And there's a good chance I'm at least going to listen.
Well, banks make money, let's be fair.
So the thing we always talk about is, how much money does everybody need to live, right? Mom and dad, do you want 100 grand or 250 grand, or do you need $1 million in your bank account so you're comfortable in 250 grand? Son and daughter, like they're not, son, daughter-in-law, daughter, son-in-law, and their 2 kids aren't living on 40 grand anymore. So try paying them 2 grand or 3 grand a month and see how long they stay. So find out what people need to live. And I'm not saying the, trips to Hawaii and all that stuff. That stuff comes out of profits when you have big years. But what do we need to live? Can the farm sustain that? Yep. And it turns into an investment, right? Whether it's land, whether it's equity, whether it's buildings, that's your investment in the business. And I think if you can get to that mentality, almost every farm we've dealt with has extreme amounts of upside.
Yeah, the goal is to be profitable enough that they don't want to pull their money. Let's be fair.
Well, I mean, I think you look at universities in the U.S., they've done it almost better than anybody. Like the Harvard Endowment Fund, last time I checked, it's like $56 billion or something. So just imagine if long-term farms said, we're not selling our land, ever. But we are going to pay, I don't care, like I don't even care if it's small, a 2% coupon. And so the off-farm heirs are getting a 2% coupon. The on-farm heirs are getting a 2% coupon. But you have this big asset worth all this money growing for 3, 4, 10, 20 generations, right? And really the only part you got to figure out is the on-farm person is how can you still lever that asset to a safe amount, right? And then the growth can still happen, and it's there forever, like an endowment fund.
I want to take this moment to give you a little highlight on one of our sponsors, Maverick Ag Consulting, providing the link between primary producer agriculture and the business world. Maverick offers specialized financial and operational consulting products that allow farmers to navigate the current farming environments. Looking to take on more dirt, an expansion in equipment, or just lay down a strategic plan for the farm? Maverick provides you with specialized resources and tools to take the gut check and emotion out of decision making. If you are ready to take the next step in your farm's definition of success, reach out to maverickag.com for more details. And back to the truth about ag. I think we take that for granted in Canada. I mean, I was talking to a 13,000 acre farm from, I think it was Pennsylvania, but correct me if I'm wrong, but 240 landlords. Like, the US is considerably, especially with land size at 40-acre parcel, it's way more fragmented than anything up here.
Well, and I think too, you just got to remember, U.S. probably 3 generations ahead of us in a lot of cases in farmers.
100%.
And so they've created the fragmentation. It started as a quarter section. Then that farmer had 2 kids, and they put joint title, and they just split it. That's 80 and 80. And then each of them had 2 kids.
Yeah.
Right. So now you're 100%. I always find that, like, some real good ways to figure out how to set up your business is go to Europe and go to the U.S. and talk to different farmers and find out what you don't want. Right. And I don't want 100 landlords. I'd be the worst farmer on earth because I'm not real politically correct with it, right? With my landlords that I deal with that think the way we do, like I love dealing with them. I've got a 93-year-old landlord that basically, as long as the roads are good, him and I have met like at least once a month, if not twice a month, for 20 years. He's one of the smartest guys. He's in my top 10 best friends. The guy's 93 years old. Rented his land for 20 years before we bought it. I love dealing with him. But then if I had 100 landlords living in New York and San Francisco that lecturing me on carbon and sustainability, I would not be a friendly person.
Okay, I want to jump to Dr. Cole because he's usually my favorite. I mean, he was my favorite last year. Even this year, I took a lot from him. But the number one thing I took from him, and I had to go back and check the stats after, but so he gave me a date. The date is 2033. And I guess his wording was it was the biggest fragmentation of primary producer agriculture in history. And the reason 2033 is that the baby boomer generation average age will hit the exact same life expectancy age that all insurance companies give on their actuarials for how long you're going to live. So whether it's health or death, we will see the largest fragmentation and estate and succession transition 2033.
9 years.
8
years. 8 years, I guess.
Yeah. And his biggest thing is there will be a liquidity crunch. And we've said that before, access to capital. How are the farms going to be able to buy out the biggest generation of land ownership? And transitional shortfalls, which we both know are terrible right now in both countries. How do we manage that?
Just trying to put it in perspective for myself. I haven't heard this one before. So Louis will be 72. He's on the back end of the baby boomers. Yeah, so he's 72.
78. 78's the age.
Yeah, I was going to say the baby boomer generation would be 72 to 87, right, at that time.
Yeah, the average 78.
Well, I mean, I want to say it once again, doesn't surprise me. We've been talking about this forever just based on the average age of a farmer, right? And so we're saying the average age right now is right around 60 and 80% of them don't have a succession plan. I mean, there you go, right? So the way I look at it is like, if you're under the age of 50 right now, the next 8 years, I would say from today for the next 15 years could be the biggest opportunity in history. And what is your plan to capture it? How are you going to do it? Right. And I would also argue that I don't care who you are, you're not going to be able to buy every opportunity that comes to you. So
not even close.
Are you working on a capital strategy to take on more debt and more risk? Are you working on a merger and acquisition strategy to rent more with variable rents and make them feel like they're still farming and semi-retirement? Are you just going to be super picky and choosy and only pick the stuff that touches your home section? Because you can't have every strategy.
Nope.
And so where do you want to be in 10 to 15 years? And what's your strategy on how to get there? And then the big thing is what are you doing right now to get there? Because if your goal is you want to be double in size or 25% bigger, and you'd like to rent most of it, not buy most of it, then start looking around to who that fits and planting the idea, because that stuff doesn't just happen overnight.
Now, to further that, I sat on a panel yesterday with Sean Haney and a couple or another individual that had on diversification, but Haney's presentation was all on farmer sentiments, right? And the farmer sentiment is that land is going to drop. What's your answer to that? Will this type of discussion push land down?
So, I mean, I've been a believer.
So, but
yeah, I've been a believer that poor land is dropping a little bit already. I think there was a decade there where it didn't matter if a quarter was good or bad in your area. It was just worth the same.
No.
I think we're starting to see spreads on dollar per acre based on the quality of the land, which is the way it should be.
Depending on the competition.
Yeah. Secondly, I mean, everyone wants to believe because there's going to be more available and because commodity prices are a little bit lower right now that land should drop. But fundamentally, land is also a function of the real estate market. And when you're nervous about the stock market and interest rates are dropping, that is really good for real estate.
And we have more wealth in agriculture than we've ever had in history.
Ever. Yeah. So without a doubt, there is going to be some ups and downs in the land market in the next decade. But do I think 10 years from now and 20 years from now, it's going to be higher than it is today?
100%.
Yes. Do I think there might be a little valley in there of 3 years where it backs off 10 or 20% and then it's up 40? I mean, what's the key word of our careers for the next decade? And I think it's volatility. I mean, Trump's just proven it for us. The thing about volatility, though, is it doesn't change where you started and where you're going. The line on the markets is still, I guess I should do it this way, right? It's just the volatility up and down on those is so much more. And I think that's commodity markets. I think that's fertilizer markets. I think that's land. It's one, because of volatility and geopolitics. And then two, it's just the flow of information on this globe, right? Like before it, you go back to 1950, 1960, it took 100 phone calls to hear about a crop failure in Brazil or, that the Panama Canal wasn't letting fertilizer through. Now we know like in 3 minutes. So it's spiked the volatility, right? So I think it's just have a plan, know where you're going and be ready for volatility. But I mean, the exciting thing about volatility is it's opportunity. Every good business has taken their hands around volatility and created opportunities.
It's just pessimism versus optimism, right?
Yeah.
The other line he had, which I had to write down and highlight, was don't let a crisis go to waste. Okay. Strategic positioning. So this was the Ball G one.
Yeah.
Like had a replacement this year, had a young guy, and his name was Trey Malone. So shout out. He was probably the most energetic, and he was my favorite of the week, to tell you the truth. So not saying he's going to ever hear this, but Purdue University, he came out like a rocket. But a couple interesting things. The one was he called it the bullwhip effect. And it was a small shock at the consumer level moves a big shock down the supply chain. So as prices are more volatile as we get to the farm gate. So his example was McDonald's right now uses spring wheat. And if they ever changed up their formula on their buns or whatever, it would decimate some of the I states because of how much they utilize. Have we ever thought about that when it comes to grain pricing?
Well, I mean, it's pretty interesting right now. Like canola oil, McDonald's is a huge user of canola oil, right? The 45Z tax credit, the first, 3 days ago, I don't know when this podcast is being released, but as of what I'm talking, 3 days ago, canola oil wasn't included in the new tax credit. As of today, it is included, but it looks like the subsidy, the GREET credit, GREET on soybeans is dropping from like $1.35 down to 40 cents, and canola from, I think it was close to $1 down to 0. So I don't know that the spread's going to be that much different. So it probably doesn't change it. But on day one, 3 days ago, when canola oil wasn't included under the new 45Z, it dropped like 50 cents a bushel overnight. Actually, in an hour, it was up all morning. So I think hands down. The other thing is that we're going to find interesting. I mean, you take RFK just said removing red food dye, but then if you read the fine print, 3 years he's giving companies because supply chains are so integrated, you can't fix it fast. So I think it just proves our point, though, the importance of network, the importance of learning, the importance of different types of a diversification and a risk management plan, right? And I think that's one thing we're looking at more and more is diversification through our supply chain, right? I don't want 20 crops. I want the 4 or 5 that I'm pretty good at growing. But then how can I diversify through my supply chain on those 4 crops to just keep touching it more and more times and helping out the supply chain?
Well, and I think it ties back to the consumer sentiment, right? Like, how are we coming across? What grains are we pushing? How do we fight back? Because as we've seen, The loudest people usually get their way, and it's not necessarily a positive for agriculture in many episodes.
No, for sure. I mean, COVID did a whole bunch of things. One thing it showed us was the delicacy of the supply chain, which was probably good for agriculture. The thing it also did, though, was wiped out a large percentage of trust in science, which agriculture relies really heavily on. And I really don't care what side of the stand people are on vaccines and science. We can all just agree that it hurt the belief in science, right? And agriculture relies on science a lot. And so we need to do a better job of our marketing side and telling the story, because we're learning that marketing and storytelling is getting to be every bit as important as science when it comes to consumers. And I would also argue when it comes to government and bureaucrats.
Okay, two more things. So farm's economic moat, also Purdue University, Trey Malone. The factors that keep your customer loyalty. And as a farm, I'm pretty sure most of the room were like, well, we don't have access to our end customer. Why does that matter? But I mean, as he was doing it, I was writing down what I thought ours were. And I'll give you what I think. You tell me if I'm totally out to lunch or not, okay? So I said our economic moat was technology. Obviously, tech, data, you can put it all together if you want. Mm-hmm. Relationships, brand, scale, and efficiency of assets. That was my top 5. What am I missing?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two ways to look at it. I think the economic moat for what kind of protects our profitability and drives bottom line. I completely agree with yours. I'd actually probably put culture and people as number one, because they drive all those things.
Yep.
I think the other way to look at it is, I've heard farmers say this too, we don't really have customers, and I don't talk to the end user other than, if you're a brewer or whatever. And people could look at doing that more. And in order than I've said, I want to go long term, that you take a picture of a can of beer in Europe and you see my kids running through the field that were integrated into a brewery. But I think the other thing to remember is, I think it's the book called Thriving on Chaos. And one of the statements in there is like, go to your customers and find out what their favorite things are about people like you and what the things they hate the most. So if you look at that on the farm, you would look at grain buyers, you would look at input like retailers, you would look at equipment, you would look at where you buy your parts from, right? And you would probably even look at, I would argue, your team. And so we did this. We don't do it as often anymore, because Jeff and I are, it's just become normal conversation. But probably 8 years ago, Jeff started. So maybe a year after that, we targeted the grain industry first, because Jeff's from there. So he knew a bunch of it. But we met with some people, and like one was, they don't like when farmers are mad that they can't get their grain in time. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but that's a fair thing as a farmer to be mad about. But then the grain buyer's like, no, I don't disagree with that. Other than that same farmer, if I phone him and it's minus 30 and there's 6 inches of snow and I want his contract 3 months early, he won't haul it. So it's kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth. So I said, okay, so what if my rule is I won't get mad, but whenever you phone me and it's crappy out, nobody else will haul, you're not bringing in my nearby contract. You're bringing in my contracts that are way out. Magically, we do it all the time, right? It was, as we got bigger, it was like, the guy's like, I don't like people complaining about having to wait in line. We bring in 2,500 ton in a day, we book it, and people don't show up in their slots. And I'm like, well, if I can bring in 2,500 in one day, why can't I just have my whole line to myself? Yeah. Wow, but that'll piss other people off. I'm like, well, then tell 4 neighbors to get together and do the same thing. Yeah. The rule is, if you can bring in 2,500 ton, you can have a line to yourself, right? So I think as farmers, we sometimes need to look at, if you were running the elevator or running the retail or running the machinery dealer, what are the things you appreciate about your bus customers, and what are the things you don't like? And then there's going to be some stuff that you just can't deal with because it pisses you off too. Yep. But I will guarantee there's tweaks you can make in your business that are win-wins, and that you're doing what most people won't, and you're getting favors back for it. And so I think that would be the other way I would look at that question.
Okay, last one, because I am on a time crunch today. So
yeah,
it was interesting because I wrote a blog probably 2-3 months ago, and it didn't get through the system real quick. And it was based on how we're losing thought leadership in agriculture. So again, when I go down to TEPAP, don't take offense to this, Dick, if you're listening, but Dick Whitman, Dr. Cole, I mean, we're getting into the same problem as the consolidation of, we're having the age of baby boomers get so high that I don't see anybody coming up behind them to give us the same thought leadership. And I mean, whether it's AI coming in and all that other stuff, I think we're going to lose a lot of great thought leadership going forward in agriculture. And even on the farm level, the baby boomers haven't taught the next generation enough. And we've just said that we have 8 years, give or take. How do we continue with thought leadership? How do we get the industry better? How do we actually move Dick's proficiency checklist ahead when these guys are going to be exiting the industry, just like a lot of what we're already saying about the baby boomers?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first comment is we shouldn't be surprised when 88%, what do we say, 81 or 88% of farms are going to transfer in the next 8 years.
Yeah.
That's the baby boomer generation. They cover a whole bunch of those, call it vice president and higher roles right now, and they're going to transition, and that includes all the consultants. I think it's like it's more like a 3-pronged approach. The one is that universities, I don't believe, are doing as good a job of extension as they used to. This is specifically in the U.S. So in Canada, we've just always done a shitty job of it.
Yeah.
But like Kleinfelter, extension at Texas A&M, Cole, extension at Virginia, Bolgi, extension at Purdue. Like those guys all came up as believers in that academic system. And I think we need to find probably a P3 model where private, and public and government somehow find a way to get together to encourage that in both Canada and the US.
Yep.
One. And you've seen that like it's Snodgrass. He's a weather guy, used to be at the university, and now he's, I think, with Nutrien, right? Like some of them, and they offer his services out. So one would be that P3 type partnership. Two would be, we just need people to step up. I mean, I'm pretty sure we probably had this conversation when we started Maverick, because I saw this 8 years ago that some of the key guys I like listening to were all 70 years old at the time. Right.
And still are. Now they're 78.
Yeah. And I mean, I could name some names in Canada too that are really important to the industry that aren't that far away from being retired.
Merle Good.
Right. Pardon?
Merle Good.
Merle Good's an example. I mean, Klippenstein's a mentor, and I'm not saying it's a year, but it's within 10 years. Right. And so how do you have a plan to deal with that? Right. And I think it's, like I said, it's universities, it's private companies realizing, I think that what FCC did with JP, right?
Yeah.
Pretty good example. I think JP is a great thing for the industry, but he's also a key VP within their company.
Yeah.
But they realize that a big chunk of his role is outward facing and good for the industry, not just inward facing. Stackhouse, same thing, right? So there's some models where you're seeing private kind of step up and let those individuals really be individuals within a big company, right? Stackhouse and JP, I don't find are very jaded by the name on their business card, right? They say what they think, even if it's not necessarily in agreement. So those are some good examples. I think lastly, like, we really need the baby boomer generation to step up in the world of mentorship, right? And I think there's a huge opportunity for some of these baby boomers to have a joint venture with younger guys and, maybe just run a combine and have a coffee. And like, I mean, like talking about John, my 93-year-old landlord again. I mean, like, I learned a lot from that man, and just having a coffee every 2 weeks, right? And the whole world would have said he was old. And I would have said, no, his body's maybe old. His brain's younger than most people I know. Like, just an interesting guy. And so I think we need the importance of mentorship and network to really become a forefront.
And I think on both sides, we need the next generation to actually go out and actually seek those out. Like I talk with.
Don't try and find a mentor on TikTok.
No, please.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had for you today, because we were on a bit of a short leash, and obviously we got a couple good guests coming up in the next few weeks. So keep a lookout for that. And thanks for listening. That's The Truth About Ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.